My name is Lily, and I'm 19. I never expected my parents to cut me off like this. They told me to leave and refused to give me any part of the inheritance. The audacity. I packed my suitcase, feeling the anger build up in my chest, and left a letter at the door. In it, I wrote the truth. I told them about the secret they thought I would never find out, the one they'd kept hidden for years. When they read it, I knew their faces would turn pale. I could already hear their footsteps, panicked, as they tried to call me, but I didn't answer. I wasn't just leaving their house, I was taking back control of my life. I walked down the driveway, suitcase in hand, a sense of finality in the air. They wouldn't come after me, not yet. They had to process the truth first. I found a cheap motel a few miles out of town, enough to get me by for a while. My phone buzzed constantly, their messages flooding in, but I ignored every single one. They didn't deserve an explanation. Not yet. That night, I sat on the bed, staring at the letter I'd left behind. I had no regrets, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They would try to fix things, of course. They always did. But this time, I wouldn't let them. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started researching everything, laws, loopholes, anything that could give me the upper hand. It was time to take control. The inheritance was mine, and they'd never see me coming. A few days went by, and the silence between us was suffocating. I thought they'd be relentless, calling non-stop, but it was almost like they were waiting for me to cave. I wouldn't. I dove into the research, slowly uncovering things I hadn't known before. Trust funds, property deeds, documents my parents thought I'd never find. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how deep their lies went. They hadn't just hidden the inheritance, they'd manipulated everything. Their business, the estate, even some family investments. They thought I was too naive to understand, but they were wrong. By the end of the week, I had enough to turn everything upside down. There were papers that proved they hadn't been truthful about the family wealth, some shady dealings that could cost them their standing. I didn't feel vindicated, though. I just felt numb. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back what was mine. I drafted an email. It was short, sharp, and to the point. I know everything. You have 1 week to give me my share. If not, I'll make sure the truth gets out. All of it. I hit send and leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding. They could try to ignore it, but they'd have no choice. They were backed into a corner now. A part of me hated what I had to do, but there was no other option. It was them or me. The email was sent, and for the first time in days, I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. But the calm didn't last. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my dad's number. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, I received a message from my mom. We need to talk. This isn't the way to handle this. I scoffed, staring at the words on the screen. They'd always thought they could control everything, including me. But not anymore. Not after everything I'd learned. I stared at the screen for a while, then typed back, "You've had your chance to handle things. Now it's my turn." I wasn't sure what I expected from them, apologies, maybe. Or a feeble attempt to explain themselves. But they didn't do either. Instead, they offered something else, money. Not my share of the inheritance, but a settlement. They wanted to buy me off. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up. They thought they could just throw money at me and fix it. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the lies, the manipulation. It was about them trying to control my future, even after everything. I sent them a reply, "It's not for sale. You have until the end of the week. Make your choice." I didn't wait for their response. They could either play their games, or they could face the consequences. But one thing was clear, I wasn't their pawn anymore. The days dragged on, the tension thick in the air. I kept myself busy, working, researching, planning. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not now. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't check it immediately. I knew what it would be, more of their attempts to manipulate me. More of their empty promises. By the time the deadline came, I was ready. I'd secured everything I needed. The documents, the proof, the evidence, they were all set to go public. All I had to do was push a button. But deep down, I knew it would change everything. Then, around 4 p.m., the call came. It wasn't from my parents, though. It was from their lawyer. Your parents want to settle this, Mississippi. We'd like to meet with you. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I wasn't going to just walk into their trap. But I knew I had the upper hand now, and I wasn't going to let them call the shots anymore. I agreed to meet them, but on my terms. They were coming to me, not the other way around. When they arrived at the small cafe I'd chosen, their faces were unreadable. But I knew they were nervous. The lawyer fidgeted, avoiding eye contact, while my parents stayed unusually silent. I didn't waste time. I'm here for what's mine, I said flatly. No more lies. No more manipulation. If you don't hand over the inheritance, the world will know exactly what you've done. My mom's hand trembled as she reached for her bag, her gaze flicking to my dad. But it was too late. The truth was already out, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The game had changed. And this time, I was the one calling the shots. The silence between us hung heavy, thick with tension. My parents exchanged a glance, their eyes betraying their panic, but they stayed silent. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, as if he knew the deal had already been struck. I wasn't sure what they were expecting, but it wasn't this. I'll give you one chance to do this the right way, I said, leaning forward. 1. You can either hand over the inheritance, or I'll make sure the world knows everything. The investments, the lies, the secret accounts. Every last thing. My mom's face twisted, the guilt obvious in her eyes. My dad, however, clenched his jaw and sat back in his chair. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. You think you can just, he started, but I cut him off. I don't care about your excuses anymore, I interrupted. You had years to do the right thing. You didn't. So now, this is your choice. But know this, I'm not bluffing. The lawyer stood up abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with the way things were unfolding. We can work something out, he said, voice shaking. There's no need for public exposure. We can negotiate. No, I said firmly. It's not a negotiation. This is me taking back what's mine. My dad stood up, fists clenched at his sides, but his words were measured now. You have no idea what you're doing, he said, voice low. You think you're in control, but you're just a kid. Not anymore, I shot back. I'm done being your pawn. Done being the person you think will always cave. You can either face the consequences, or you can finally act like a parent and give me what's mine. For the first time, my dad seemed unsure. He glanced at my mom, who was now biting her lip nervously. I saw the cracks beginning to form in their armor. A tense silence stretched between us before he spoke again, voice quieter. We'll give it to you, he said, his tone almost defeated. But you have to promise you'll let this go. You won't. I'll let it go when I get what I'm owed, I interrupted. Until then, don't bother asking for any more promises. My mom nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, though she was trying to hold it together. It was over. They'd lost. And I'd won. I stood up, the weight of the moment settling in. "I'll expect the paperwork by the end of the week," I said, turning away from the table. "And if I don't see it, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." As I walked out of the cafe, a strange mix of relief and anger coursed through me. It was finally over, but the battle had changed me. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that house days ago. Now, I was ready to rebuild my life on my terms. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and finalizing documents. My parents had agreed to everything, though it was clear they weren't doing it willingly. I didn't care. Their reluctance didn't matter. The inheritance was mine, and they knew they had no choice but to comply. The lawyer had sent over the paperwork, but I had a team of my own look over it before I signed anything. I wasn't going to let them slip anything past me, not after everything they'd done. They didn't know it yet, but I was already planning my next move. The money was one thing, finally having it meant I could start fresh, do what I wanted. But the real victory was reclaiming my power. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself, to demand what I deserved. And I wasn't going to let them forget it. A few weeks later, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had my own space, my own life, and I wasn't looking back. My parents tried to reach out again, but I ignored their calls. I had no interest in their apologies or excuses. They'd shown me who they really were, and I had no room for that in my life anymore. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my dad, and for a moment, I hesitated. But curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. The letter was an apology. A weak one. He claimed they'd made mistakes and that he regretted everything. But it didn't matter anymore. The past was gone. I had moved on, and I was finally free of their control. I folded the letter and tossed it in the trash. I had everything I needed now: freedom, control, and a future that was mine to shape. The world was wide open, and for the first time, I was ready to live it on my own terms.